This UCSD TV program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest programs. The Sam and Rose Stein Institute for Research on Aging is committed to advancing lifelong health and well-being through research, professional training, patient care, and community service. As a nonprofit organization at the University of California San Diego School of Medicine, our research and educational outreach activities are made possible by the generosity of private donors. It is our vision that successful aging will be an achievable goal for everyone. To learn more, please visit our website at aging.ucsd.edu.
Okay, so my name's Jacqueline. I'm an associate professor here in the Department of Family and Preventive Medicine. And today I'm going to talk to you about why physical activity research is evolving. I'm going to talk a little bit about sitting. So first I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to come and do this talk. I have done a talk like this before for the Stein Public Lecture, and I talked principally then about physical activity. So today I'm going to talk about something a bit different to keep it new, but at the same time, please appreciate that it is new. And so what I'm saying is also evolving as the research is evolving. So this day in October 2014 is sort of my best sense of where the field is going, but that is actually changing all the time. When I did my physical activity talk, I actually succeeded in getting a bra out and showing you what you could do as exercise on holiday. And so when I sent my colleagues the UCSD television link, one of my colleagues wrote back and said, "I was eating lunch. I choked when I saw that." So I'm hoping to have some fun tonight as well. I think there will be some fun images, so we'll get a few laughs. Again, I really appreciated that UCSD TV made it possible to send around the presentation to colleagues near and far. When it actually was on UCSD TV, my husband fell asleep, didn't manage to stay through it. And just last week, my grandmother died. She was 92. So I'm dedicating this talk to her. Her name was Catherine McMillan. And when I was at her funeral, I mentioned to my uncle's stepfather, who was also in his 90s, that I was going to do this talk. And he said, "Oh, I'd love to see something about that." And I said, "I can send it to you. It's going to be recorded." So thank you for this opportunity. And thanks to my grandmother for also the support she gave me over the years. So I'd also like to thank Michelle Black and my team who've helped me put this presentation together. Michelle's here. You might recognize her because she also used to help organize and lead these lectures. She's now doing a PhD with our group and mostly on what we call sedentary behavior. So to go with the evolution theme, this is what seems to have happened. We did evolve into upright humans, but as we started to use tools, perhaps we became less upright, and now we spend most of our time sitting. There's another evolution even beyond this sitting. It's that as computers got thinner and more mobile, we got less mobile and maybe larger. So I think we obviously are aware that we spend a lot more time than we used to on devices like computers. So who has heard about sitting and health in the media? A shout out, yes, no? Yes, so a few people have. So this is one of the reasons that I wanted to talk today about this topic that is emerging, even before I might have research to be able to back up some of the thoughts that I'm developing on this. But it's appearing in the media very frequently. So when you do a Google search, there's over a million hits on something like "sitting is the new smoking." And the types of headlines you end up seeing is questions like, is sitting the new smoking? Get up or lose hours of your life every day, scientist says. Too much sitting linked to an early death. How sitting all day is slowly killing you. Are you sitting yourself to death? Sitting is the new smoking even for runners. Is your chair killing you? Get up. Is the sitting the new smoking? Another one of those. Warning, sitting is the new smoking. Don't just sit there. No, really, the chair is out to kill us. Sitting kills, moving heals. So I was wondering, why is there this great media attention? Because, us that are in the physical activity world, it's not that we get media attention all the time. Physical activity saves. And maybe that's partly it. If you've ever studied the media, sort of the negative story is what does grab attention, and the drama, and you can see it in these headlines. So perhaps that's it. It sounds more dramatic than physical activity saves. So again, this whole sitting is the new smoking. I was really surprised to come across materials like this that said an hour of sitting is unhealthy as smoking 2 cigarettes. It decreases your life expectancy by over 20 minutes, etc., etc. But what I wanted to point out here, as these sorts of information are in the public hands, the source, which you might be able to see down here, is actually media articles, so maybe not based on scientific articles. It's more than in the media. In the London Underground this summer, sitting is the new smoking. Sitting is the new enemy. Move. And this MOVE organization is an organization that's come up in the UK to get people moving. This is an excellent article that I really recommend. Sitting is bad for you, so I stopped it for a whole month. My calves weren't happy, neither were my kids. So this is a gentleman that wrote a fantastic article about doing this, and it was very humorous, but it just showed to me how in some ways, how ridiculous this message is becoming. And so I wanted to give the chance of a researcher's perspective on this topic. Another organization that's come up, so again, there's organizations coming up around this, the juststand.org. And again, they have information like sitting so much should scare you. And actually, this type of organization seems to be perhaps sponsored by a standing desk firm. So not only is the media grasping this, but important organizations are grasping it. So in 2013, the American Medical Association adopted a policy recognizing the potential risks of prolonged sitting and encouraging employers, employees, and others to make available alternatives to sitting, such as standing workstations and isometric balls. Those are like the yoga balls that you can sit on and roll. Prolonged sitting, particularly in work settings, can cause health problems, and encouraging workplaces to offer employees alternatives to sitting all day will help to create a healthier workforce. So this is a medical association adopting a policy around sitting. Australia did the same. The health organization in Australia have physical activity guidelines, which hopefully you're a bit familiar with, about doing any physical activity is better than doing none, and trying to get about 150 minutes of moderate intensity a week. They also developed sedentary behavior guidelines, minimize the amount of time spent in prolonged sitting, break up long periods of sitting as often as possible. And in the UK in 2011, they also included in their physical activity guidelines around sitting for children, adults, and older adults. So all older adults should minimize the amount of time spent being sedentary or sitting for extended periods. So given these policy changes and this sort of guidance, I think it's an important topic to discuss in a public setting. So here's a little comparison of the number of articles that there are related to physical activity. So this, for example, can portray the amount of evidence that we have to say physical activity is important for your health. So moving is important for your health. So that's the red line. The blue line is the amount of articles that you have saying that sedentary behavior or sitting is problematic for your health. So there's a big difference, not only in the number of articles, but in the number of years that physical activity has been studied. And really, it almost took a century from the first article published till we had American physical activity guidelines from the Center of Disease Control in the mid-90s, encouraging us to be more physically active. So it's really interesting to me that we have now got sedentary or sitting guidelines, even though there's so little research on this topic. I also wanted to give you perspective from smoking to see how that evolved. So in 1950 was the first case control studies published on the relationship between smoking and poor health. In 1964, there was a Surgeon General's report. In 1974 were the first restrictions on where people could smoke, and in 1994, smoke-free workplaces. So almost 50 years was the scope of when that research got acted upon in policy. Now, I don't want us necessarily to say it should take 50 years or it should take a century before research actually leads to policy. If there's good research and good evidence, then it should move more quickly. And certainly in the case of smoking, there were some obstructions to getting the evidence accepted at a policy level because there were competing interests. So maybe one of the reasons that sitting is getting so much interest, as I mentioned, was the media, that having this sort of exciting sitting is the new smoking message. Also, it might be that there's nobody campaigning against it. There's nobody whose interests are necessarily affected by this. So those might be reasons why policies are rising so quickly. But what I want to talk to you today about is the evidence for having sitting policies sufficient yet? Can we be confident in what we're saying and what we're seeing? So why also are we seeing this rise of sitting as a problem? So essentially, this pie chart shows you in the red about the average numbers of hours that we sit, that we're sedentary. So about 10 hours a day. We do a few minutes of moderate vigorous physical activity. That's the green slice, the MVPA as we call it. And then we spend also a few hours doing sort of light activity, which might be sort of moving around the house and other light sort of activity. So one of the reasons that maybe we should be focusing on this sitting problem is because we do it for so long during the day. So there's that, and so many of us do it for so long during the day. So in comparison to the physical activity, only a few people, actually it's about 3% of older adults are meeting physical activity guidelines. So there's clearly a problem in how much activity we are doing and how much sitting we are doing. So the other reason why it's become so prominent is because the research has been showing relationships, associations with various health outcomes, including all-cause and cardiovascular disease mortality, different cardiovascular diseases, type 2 diabetes, weight gain and obesity, metabolic syndrome, chronic kidney disease, breast and colon cancer, some musculoskeletal symptoms, depressive symptoms, and cognitive functioning. So some studies have shown this, but not all studies show this. For example, in our own work, we're not seeing the relationship between sitting time and depressive symptoms or cognitive functioning. But if you look at the evidence overall, and this is from studies that are prospective. So if you have a prospective study, it says your risk at this point and then looks at it over time. And that's a better scientific design to see is what changes over time. So from these types of studies, in the red bars show you positive associations. So when basically that there was an association, that was significant. So for example, obesity was significantly related to sitting. And you see there that there are more studies that show there was an association than the blue, the boxes in blues, are the studies where there wasn't an association. So you see that there's more studies showing associations than there are not when you look at this particular review paper. And across these main outcomes, obesity risk, diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease, and mortality. So I think there's some signal there in these type of epidemiological studies. But I think we have to recognize there are some measurement issues. So many epidemiological studies do use self-reported data. So somebody would complete a survey, and quite often they're completing a survey about how much time they watch television. So we might be able to say that excessive watching of television might be related to some of these outcomes. But then you have to question, okay, when you're watching television, not only are you sitting, but you may also be snacking on unhealthy things or seeing adverts for unhealthy snack foods. So there may be a little bit of confounding going on there with diet as well. Also, when we look at self-reported survey measures compared to objective measures, we tend to see there's about a 2-hour difference a day. So when people report on their sedentary behavior, in some instances they're underreporting, and in some instances they're overreporting. But we've just got to think that a lot of the larger epidemiological studies, how confident can we be in this self-reporting of sitting time? Because it's not easy to remember how much time you sit. It's not something that we consciously think about all the time. And one of the other differences that I also saw in some research that's recently been completed was that when we used our objective measures of sitting, there was about a 30-minute reduction in sitting time, according to these measures. But what participants reported themselves looked more like a 2-hour reduction in sitting. So again, I think we just have to question, what are we able to remember and say? This is not to say that people aren't trying to report what they remember, but I think it's a very hard behavior to remember. So the further complication is when you do look at sitting objectively, and what I mean by that is most of the studies that have objective measures have what we call a little accelerometer that you wear on your hip. And it was actually designed to measure physical activity. But you can tell from a metric that we call the counts per minute, if the counts are really high, then you're moving more. So researchers have said, if the counts are under 100, then you are not moving. You're probably sitting or being sedentary. And sedentary kind of incorporates both sitting and standing. But I think there's a big difference between sitting and standing. And I'll demonstrate that as I go through. But what our data shows is that when you are standing, most of the time you are standing under this 100 count cutoff. So if studies say if you break up your sitting then it has a positive health effect. They're saying when you cross this 100 threshold, you're having a positive health effect. So they're actually not looking at the difference between sitting and standing, because standing tends to fall under this cut point. They're more looking at the difference between sitting and standing and moving. And I think we should be looking at standing as a separate behavior. So one of the ways we can actually now start to do that is with this new device called an ActivePower. And it's basically worn on the thigh, and it does detect sitting accurately. It differentiates standing. It gets sit to stand transitions, which is the process of you actually doing this, which we think also might be important. And it gets at stepping too. So it gives you some metric of movement. So given the evidence that's mostly out there, and given maybe the measurement techniques, how confident can we be going forward? So the other way to think about this is, what are the designs of the studies? So when the CDC recommends different types of effective programs, for example, that they include in their community preventive services, they're really looking at prospective studies, and particularly concurrent comparison groups. And basically, your randomized controlled trial intervention is actually the gold standard of evidence. So let's see if we can find some of those. So if we look just more recently at the number of physical sedentary behavior articles that we found in one search engine that we use, and we look, say, just since 2010. So there's been about 63 interventions since 2010, but only about a quarter of those are actually randomized controlled trials. And most of them are just a few weeks long. Mostly they're in children, and mostly they're in workplaces. So this is maybe what the classroom of tomorrow will look like, where there are standing desks and children are standing doing various activities in their classrooms. And maybe this is what the workplace of tomorrow is going to look like. Can you believe it? This is like a hamster wheel that this gentleman is walking in. And another example here, this is a treadmill desk, we call it, where you can actually walk at a slow pace while you stand and work. And one of our colleagues built one of these in our office, and certainly I've tried it out, and it is possible to use. The day I used it, I had the wrong trousers on for extended walking, but those sorts of things might be important too. So here's what we find in the interventions that were conducted in adults. This graph shows you, at the daily level, the number of minutes of reduced sitting time. So basically, we're trying to get people to sit less often. How many minutes did these interventions that have been published manage to reduce sedentary time? So there's quite a lot where at a daily level, they're not really getting much, they're under 50 minutes. And then there's a few studies, even up to 200 minutes reduction in sitting time. So now I'm going to look at two of those that focused on older adults. So one of those was conducted in Brisbane, Australia. It was what we call a pre-post study design. So they didn't have a randomized controlled trial. So that's when you intervene with a group and then you don't do anything with another group. They just looked at the same group of people pre-post. They had about 59 participants, just a couple of weeks. They were mostly 60 years of older. And they basically met with the participants one-on-one and then gave them feedback. And the key message here was stand up and move after 30 minutes of uninterrupted sitting. The other study was conducted in Glasgow, Scotland. Again, the pre-post design, 24 participants, 60 years and older. And the intervention, again, similarly showed individual counseling. They didn't particularly give a specific goal, And they used visual feedback from this thigh-worn accelerometer that I showed you. So I'll show you some examples of that feedback that we use in our study too, so you can see what that looks like. So basically, these two studies did have what we call significant effects, but they didn't reduce the number of minutes by that much. So that's where what we know about trying to reduce sitting time in older adults. So then we ourselves conducted a pilot intervention, which was supported with funding from the Department of Family Preventive Medicine here. So again, we only did a small trial, but we did use a randomized controlled design. And we are interested very much in two different behaviors. One was, could we get participants to reduce their sitting by about 2 hours a day, which is about 25% of their sitting time? And could we get a different group of people to increase the number of these sit-to-stand transitions? So they didn't have to stand for long, but they did have to break up their sitting time. So we asked them to get an extra 30 sit-to-stand transitions in their day above what they normally did. So we recruited 15 workers and 15 non-workers because we were really interested in, is this easy to do if you're working in an office environment, and is it very difficult to do at home? We recruited 50 to 75-year-olds, and we also had an inclusion criteria that we wanted to look at what we called super sitters, so people that sat for at least 8 hours a day. And essentially, unfortunately, that was really easy to find. So the participants really received counseling and feedback, and we provided them with various tools to help remind them to stand. And those that were working in offices, we also provided them with a standing desk. So this is some of the type of feedback that we could provide from this thigh-worn inclinometer that people had on. So for example, you can see the red is their sitting time. So across a week, somebody could see that they were managing to reduce their sitting time over time. And we also had graphs that showed them what times of day they were sitting longer so that they could work out when to break up their sitting. So basically, what did we find? So in the top graph, this is the number of minutes that was daily sitting minutes. So the group in red were the group we said, try and reduce your sitting by about 2 hours a day. And that's what they achieved. They reduced their sitting by 120 minutes a day. But as you'll notice, the group that we asked to do these more sit-to-stand transitions, they didn't reduce their overall sitting time. So they didn't stand a lot more. But as the graph below shows, that group, the group in black, did increase their sit-to-stand transitions, and the group in red did not. So we learned something very important here about messaging and about goal setting. So if we wanted people to do these specific different behaviors, we talked to them in a very different way. We gave them very different goals, and that we needed to do that to see the effect of the intervention on these different outcomes. So what was the effect on the intervention? On stepping, on movement, on physical activity? Pretty small, about a 10-minute increase a day in both groups. So in summary, this was what we thought was the first randomized control trial of sitting in older adults. It was definitely the first study to target these sit-to-stand transitions and to impact these sit-to-stand transitions, because we think these are important. I'm going to tell you again why in a minute. And we hadn't seen other interventions that succeeded in changing this, which makes sense to me, because if I tell you to stand for longer, your opportunities to move from the sitting to stand position do actually reduce. So we wanted to see, could we increase these sit to stand? And again, we compared workers and non-workers, and we didn't see much difference in the overall sitting, but certainly in these sit-to-stand transitions, the folks who weren't working found that easier to do. So the working folks might have found that a little bit disruptive in their routine. And as I said, the effect on physical activity was minimal, but the effect on sitting was really impressive. So we still now have some evidence that we can change behaviors. We can get people to sit less, but studies really have not looked at changes to the health outcomes. What does this do to our health in a longer randomized controlled trial? And I know those trials are underway, so the evidence will be coming, but we don't have that evidence yet. So maybe when you hear a radio article about this or see a newspaper article, think about, is there enough evidence yet to make some of these claims? And also, we don't yet know what outcomes might be impacted. So certainly things in the metabolic syndrome, for example, insulin or obesity might be impacted. But I'm questioning whether something like depression and cognition would be impacted. So again, what we might find is that reducing your sitting is good for some health behaviors, but not all. So we don't know that yet. But laboratory studies are really promising. So when you bring people into a lab and you ask them either to sit all day or to do 30 minutes of physical activity or to do a little bit of walking 1 minute every 30 minutes, you see a difference in glucose. So this comes from the area under the curve, so less is better in this situation. So the group that had 1 minute breaks every 30 minutes did better. So we have some good evidence coming from these very acute studies, as we call them, very short-term studies. So maybe one of the messages that you didn't get is that even if you are active, sitting may be detrimental for your health. And that people who are active, I consider myself one of those people. I run my dog every morning and I run my son to school. He scooters, and so I run along with him. But then I spend the rest of the day sitting. So I also sit a lot. So you can be both. You can be active and you can sit a lot. And this, people are peeved about this. So when people get this message in the media, they are annoyed because they're doing something for their health. They're trying to be active. Oh, but now you're telling me something else I have to do. And that's frustrating for the public. But interesting too, the physical activity researchers are a little bit peeved. So what they're saying is sitting is just the inverse of physical activity. We don't need to be studying sitting. We need to be studying physical activity. If you get people to be active, they will sit less. And also, you'd have to get people to stand for hours to have an impact on energy. So is it even a sensible thing to be trying to pursue? So I'm going to argue against them. If someone is active, will they sit less? That's one of the questions. So we have a study where we focused on trying to increase physical activity on the left there. And we had our study looking on trying to reduce sitting. So when we try and get people to be more active, we succeed in getting them to be active for about 20 minutes a day. But they really only reduce their sitting time by about 10 minutes a day. So increasing people's physical activity does not necessarily reduce their sitting. And it doesn't reduce it to the amounts that we might want, which our intervention, when we focused on sitting, reduced the sitting by 2 hours, but only increased the physical activity by about 10 minutes. So to me, the two are not the same thing. And another thing I wanted to point out here is I'm a physical activity researcher. It is really difficult to encourage people to be physically active. And there actually might be a group of people where it's too much to be asked them to be physically active. And so actually starting with saying to them, how about you start by reducing sitting? And maybe that's how we do an intervention. We reduce people's sitting time, and as they have success with that, we say, now let's try to increase your physical activity too. The other thing is, are physical activity and sitting just opposites. So from a behavioral perspective, which is where I come from, I see them as quite different things. So for example, if I was trying to increase physical activity, I'd be talking about trying to get you to be active for about 30 minutes. If I was to reduce your sitting time, I'm looking at 120 minutes. The social norm, some people are active, but the social norm of sitting is really everyone sits everywhere. I'm glad I'm the speaker. I'm the one standing tonight. There's chairs everywhere, and we are expected to sit in them. What facilities do we have? Well, sidewalks is somewhere you can be physically active, or gyms. A standing desk is the facility that might help you stand more. So these two are different things entirely. Reminders. If I want you to be physically active, I may be saying about once a day, but if I'm trying to reduce your sitting time, it's almost every 20 minutes. So the barriers could be different. Barriers to being physical active might be fear of falls, or my mother's barrier is sweating. She doesn't like that. Reducing sitting time is disruptive. It could be disruptive to what you're doing, and it can be a bit uncomfortable standing for long periods. So if I was trying to increase your physical activity, maybe I'd say break it up into 3 10-minute bouts across the day. But again, if I'm trying to reduce your sitting, I'm saying about 10 minutes, do 10-minute bouts 12 times a day, or do a 2-minute bout 60 times a day. So it's a very different perspective of trying to get you to change that often during the day. So again, the things that might help you is seeing your walking shoes, or seeing a program in a park, or having a pedometer for physical activity. But the things that will remind you constantly throughout the day to stand up more often would be quite different. They might be alarms, they might be a vibrating device, it might be a phone call, it might be when you see a commercial break on the television, that's a prompt to stand up. So to me, they're not the same behavior, and how you change them is not the same. So we actually did some focus groups around technology that might be used for sitting less. And again, I use in my physical activity interventions a pedometer, and I find those very useful. But I wouldn't be able to use the same tools to reduce sitting. So we looked to see what technologies might be out there, because you need something that reminds you frequently. And what we learned was important from the participants in this study was that they did want to see something and get feedback throughout the day, because they realized this was something they were going to have to keep track of. And so they wanted a device that they didn't have to charge too often, that they actually could wear anywhere on their body as well. Because they said, well, if it's on the wrist, some days I might want that. I'd like to be able to pin it to my shirt, or attach it, put it in my pocket. So having things that you could move around. So again, we're still working to work out what those technological solutions might be. We just spoke to this group today. So this is a cushion, the advanced whoopee cushion, perhaps, where it basically is detecting some things in your body and passing that information to your phone. But what we're excited about is that they do have this vibrate function in the seat, and that might help remind you to stand up. So we'll pursue this and see where it goes. So as I say, hot off the discussion today. So what I'm thinking is we really need to do this study. We need to compare in a longer term, say even a 6-month randomized controlled trial, the difference. A group that gets nothing, a group that is encouraged to do physical activity, a group that is encouraged to reduce their sitting, and a group that's encouraged to do these extra sit to stands. So basically put physical activity and sitting head to head and really compare them in a proper study. Because I think there are different mechanisms that could be at work. So this is a little complex, but I'll describe this to you and then you'll see it a few times so you get used to it. So the bottom line is if you're encouraging physical activity. How that might happen is in this 30-minute bout, you go for your morning walk. And then essentially for the rest of the day, you're likely to sit. There's probably going to be some bathroom breaks in there. But essentially, you're going to sit for a long period of time, and you're not really going to reduce your sitting much, and you're not going to have many of these sit-to-stand transitions. But you do have this burst of energy expended at the beginning of the day. The other group would be encouraging you to sit less by breaking up your sitting in 10-minute bouts across the day. So that could result in about 120 minutes reduced sitting, and the space between the sitting bouts would be about 40 minutes. So where you see on the bottom line, you've got this 10 hours roughly where you're really not moving. The time when you're not standing would be about 40 minutes. And then you have the last group. So let me just mention the energy expenditure in that group. So you'd have less energy expended because when you're standing, you're expending less energy than if you're actually walking. But since you'll be doing it for 120 minutes, the energy expenditure actually equals out somewhat. And then you have this last group where all we're asking you to do is probably do this sit-to-stand transition and maybe stand for about 2 minutes. So there, you're not going to be expending much energy, but you are, and you're not going to be standing for long, so about 60 minutes of standing, but you are going to have a lot more of these sit-to-stand transitions, and the time between the bouts will be much smaller, so they would only be 18 minutes. So this is if you look at it from the perspective of energy expenditure, which has been kind of a focus of the physical activity researchers saying, well, physical activity expends more energy and that's what you need to do. So another way of thinking about it is thinking about muscle contractions. So again, at the beginning of the day, when you do your physical activity, you're going to have a burst of muscle contractions. And then the group where they're doing a stand every 10 minutes, the muscle contractions are going to be less often, and then the group that are getting up every 18 minutes, they're having more muscle contractions. Blood flow is another mechanism that might be at work. So when you're physical active, you have this hydrostatic pressure or blood flow that is, again, activated when you're doing that. In the group that are doing the 10 minutes of standing, the whole time they're standing, they're going to be having this positive blood flow. So that group might actually benefit most from the blood flow perspective. And then we're also looking at mitochondrial functioning. And so what you could see is in the physical activity group, you might have this peak, but because then you sit for the rest of the day, it's really going to dip. In the sitting group, it could be a bit up and down. And in the standing group, where you're just constantly doing these sit-to-stand transitions, it never gets to dip, because you're always keeping it activated by kind of waking it up as you do your sit-to-stand transition. So to summarize this, on the energy expenditure, the physical activity group might look like the standing reduced sitting or standing for 2 more hours group in the terms of energy expenditure. In terms of muscle contraction, the physical activity group might look more like the 30 extra stands group. In terms of blood flow, the best group would be the one that's reducing the sitting by 2 hours or standing for 2 more hours, again in bouts. For mitochondrial activity, the constant group, the one that has the extra, that it never dips, might be important. And then if time between activities is important, the extra group that does the extra stands might be important. So just to summarize that, you can kind of see that there are potentially more positive stars around this group that just does the extra stands. So again, if that does have positive health impacts, it's a very different message just saying break up your sitting as frequently as possible, but you don't have to stand for long. So that might be helpful for some people and it might be disruptive for others, but that's really what we'll see as we go forward. So I think sedentary behavior deserves to be put to this test. And one way that I think about it is to compare it with sleep research. So if people are getting cross because we say, even if you're active, you need to sit less, well, I think we all know, even if we're active, we need a good night's sleep. So to not put these health behaviors up against each other and feel like, oh no, if I'm doing this, why do I also have to do this other behavior? Also, sleep is not just the opposite of physical activity. It has unique health effects in the same way that reducing sitting might have unique health effects. How you change sleep is very different from how you change physical activity. And physical activity researchers are not sleep researchers. So again, allow this new field to emerge and give time for new experts to emerge. So allow it to evolve. So to start to draw to a close, is all sitting bad for older adults? I don't like this, sitting is the enemy message, because I don't think all sitting is bad for older adults. I think sitting at the theater is extremely engaging. Sitting at a family dinner has very important social benefits. Playing bridge, doing crosswords, playing chess are all things that may be having cognitive benefits and, for example, the bridge social benefits. Although certainly in one of our interventions, the ladies playing bridge did say that they stood up between hands so that they actually got some standing time. So, sometimes when you feel that life and its complications are completely out of control, you just want some plain, uncomplicated advice, not explanations, background, or analysis like I've shown. You just want some simple suggestions for what to do next. Here's a little list. Think about standing up during commercial breaks. Think about folding clothes, washing dishes, or ironing while watching the television. Think about standing during phone calls. Drink more water. Going to the water cooler or the tap and the restroom will break up sitting time. Or drink from a smaller cup and you have to go fill it more regularly. This came from one of our participants as a tip. If you're still working, have standing or walking meetings, have a standing desk. This was a nice one. If you're commuting on the bus, offer your seat to someone else and stand. Ask for a bar seat at a restaurant. That way you can comfortably and easily take standing breaks during the meal without feeling like you're standing up around a table. There are some websites that might be helpful. One is the Standing Clock, and there's also a Stand app that you can unload to your phone that might be helpful. But certainly when you're thinking about doing extended standing, wear comfortable shoes. If you do get a good standing desk, it's important to set it up so that it's ergonometry safe. And sometimes you put a pad on the ground so that, again, it makes it more comfortable. Again, when you're standing up, take a few seconds, because again, some people do struggle when they go from a sit to stand position feeling a little bit dizzy. So take a few seconds before you move. And again, work on making sure that you stand up, in the most supported way as you stand up. Either use your arms or get used to then being able to stand up without help from your arms. So definitely think about safety when you're doing it. So in conclusion, sedentary behavior is a research field that is growing and that might deserve recognition as being separate from physical activity research. There are still measurement issues to be resolved in this research, and there is some evidence of associations, but causal evidence from randomized control trials is still lacking. But given the amount of time we do spend sitting, small breaks from sitting would do no harm. But please continue to also try to be active. So thank you. I'll take questions now. Okay, so the question is for folks that may be active during the day, but then have a very sedentary job, but standing during that employment is not so easy. Are there other things you can do while seated? So again, it's going to depend on what mechanism might be most important. So the mechanism I mentioned about if it's to do with the standing and the blood flow, then maybe you do need that. If it's to do with muscle contraction, again, maybe you do need that. But what I have seen is that it's possible to get a little bicycle pedals that you can use under your desk. So I've seen research on using that and it being useful, but I don't know yet what the health impacts are. Right. So the question might be about whether the prone position is a problem, whether one is awake or asleep. So again, if the mechanism is about blood flow, then that might be an issue. There have been studies done that I know some people in our field look at when people are forced to have bed rest. What is the impact of that? But again, I have not looked into that research closely because I'm trying to look more at what most people are likely to do, and that is not such a common situation. So the gentleman's asking about, are there any observational comparisons of different employment types that might be helpful? So this is actually where our field of research started out. Some of the original studies basically compared death rates and heart disease rates in the bus conductor and the bus driver. So the bus driver is sitting driving all day, the bus conductor, this was conducted in London where we have the double-decker buses, so they were moving around a lot, and essentially they did see a difference in those two groups. So is it because the bus driver is sitting, or is it because the conductor is moving around? And so that's where you would say, well, it's just their opposite ends of the energy expenditure. And what we're trying to see is, okay, what about the person that might stand in the middle? So again, there definitely are occupations where there are more standing, and some of those occupations have health problems with them too. I mean, extended periods of standing can also have adverse effects. So that's what we've got to find, is where is that middle healthy ground? Right. So let me answer the question. So I have good news. So the question is, are we researching folks who are over 90, and are we respecting the fact that as folks age, and maybe the over 90-year-olds to the over 100-year-olds need to sit down and find it tiring to stand? So in the sitting research that we did, it was to 75-year-olds. In the physical activity research that I do, we have 103-year-olds in our program, and our average age is 84. So we're definitely learning from older adults. And the trial that I would like to propose would be to include older adults and look at, is it possible, safe, healthy for the very old as for the younger old, middle-aged and younger people, because maybe these benefits are not going to be beneficial in a 30-year-old. They might actually be best in a 60, 70, 80-year-old. So I'd like to be able to answer that question. But we relish when we can recruit participants who are in their 90s and 100s. Next question. I didn't see who was next. Yes, gentleman there. Right. So the question is, any research on using the Fitbit, which is it's a device that measures physical activity mostly, and it can be worn in different places. So I have not seen Fitbit data that shows reductions in sitting time. Again, my instinct about that would be that it is a device more used to encourage you to be physically active, and that doesn't necessarily mean reduction in sitting time. So some of these devices, for example, they'll give you a reminder to move, but they only stop reminding you when you actually move. So they don't respect that standing is not sitting. So they would continue to bug you while you are standing. So when we're trying to get people to stand and have that as a different behavior to study, we need different devices.
I just love our recliners.
Have I looked at recliners at all, is the question. I can only have a personal story of a recliner. One time we were trying to work out is when we wear these devices, like how long could you really sit without registering any movement on a device at all? Because what we sometimes say is when we see no movement, we think the person's not wearing it. So we were testing how long could we actually sit for without registering anything on these devices. So I got myself into my recliner, put my laptop on my lap, was working on a grant, and I did not register any movement for over 2 hours on that device. So I think when we get ourselves nested in our recliners, we can be very, very immobile. So maybe that's a note to end on. So please think about breaking up your sitting time and think about being active, and bear with us as we try and improve the evidence to be able to come up with stronger, clearer recommendations for your health. Thank you so much for coming.